Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, welcome back to the channel. A few words, if you will, on remote ID. Now, it's a fait accompli, as they say in India, which means it's in effect as of the 16th of September this month. This month is September. As of the 16th of September 2023, remote ID is a thing. It's a rule. You've got to comply with it, so they say. But, of course, there's been some last-minute changes. The FAA got caught unawares. They were unaware that you couldn't get these modules. They don't go out much. They sit in their office. They very rarely go out and look at the real world. It's all walls of donuts and gallons of coffee in the FAA. So it caught them by surprise to find out that there were not enough remote ID modules for people to actually comply with this rule. So they came out and said, well, we're going to extend enforcement, which means that if you don't have remote ID and they catch you between now and March, they're not going to go too hard on you. You still have to comply. The actual wording of their thing says you must still comply with the rule if you can, but if you can't, well, we're not going to beat you too hard. We'll use half a nightstick, not the whole thing. And Kevin Morris was on a live stream this week in which he said, you just need to be making an effort to comply, and if somebody stops you and questions you, as long as you have made an attempt to get a remote ID module, you'll be right, mate. You don't even have to provide them with a receipt to prove that you've ordered your remote ID module. So I got some words of advice for people. They're worth what you pay for them, which is generally nothing. But let me tell you what I think you should be doing now if you live in America at the moment, between now and March. First of all, the most important thing to do between now and March is nothing. You are not going to go out and buy a remote ID. Don't waste your money just yet. Even if you do decide to comply, which some of you will, and I can understand, if you do decide to comply, hang on to your money until March. Why not? You can earn interest on it, or at least you could pay some down on the credit card and not be charged as much interest. Your money is valuable to you. Don't give it to a broadcast remote ID company just so you can have something you don't need until March. That's what I would say. First of all, don't buy now. You've given 6 months grace, use it to save yourself some money. And the thing is that if you are approached by law enforcement or a Karen or even someone from the FAA, you'll be able to recognize them by the donut and coffee stains on their shirts. If you're approached by these people and they say, where's your remote ID? You can turn around, hand on heart, and say, I'm waiting for it to be delivered. Now, don't say you've ordered one. No. You don't have to tell them that. Just say, I'm waiting for it to be delivered. So I wouldn't say that you should lie to them. Don't lie to them. You can say, hand on heart, I'm waiting for it to be delivered, without telling them that it's not going to be delivered until you've ordered it and you haven't ordered it yet. You're still waiting for it to be delivered. It's just you haven't placed the order. So things they need to know, things they don't need to know. They're not going to ask you for a receipt, so that will suffice. So there you go. Carry on. Normal business. Just fly your drones until March. Then sit down, reconsider what you do. Now, the second thing I'd recommend is we've got a strategy here. I think the best strategy for those who don't want to be breaking the rules is to fly sub 250. Get yourself things. I mean, sub 250 craft these days are pretty damn capable. Get yourself a grinder Reno if you're into freestyle, or some other little sub 250 craft, and fly that. Or a fixed wing, plenty of fixed wing sub 250s if that's your bag. Fly those and fly them everywhere you can, publicly, as often as you can, so that the public get used to seeing these things, and the Karens get their phones out. Oh, no remote ID, 911, quick. And the cops roll up. Ooh, oh, excuse me, sir, do you know you have to have remote ID in this craft? And you turn around and say, got any scales, officer? Weigh this damn thing. It's sub 250. And the rule says, if it's sub 250 and I'm flying recreationally, I don't need remote ID. We will need to educate the Karens, the public, law enforcement, that not all drones need remote ID. So the more sub 250s we fly, and the more times the public, the Karens and the police are engaged with us saying you've got to have remote ID, and the more times we can prove we don't, then the more desensitized these groups, these individuals, these people become to the belief that if it's a drone, it's got to have remote ID. They'll soon realize, well, they don't all have to have remote ID. And if the police get called out enough on missions of folly because someone's flying a sub 250 and they just turn up and say, oh, okay, eventually they will give that such a low priority, if they're not doing it already, that when Karen sees a drone flying and calls it up and says, it hasn't got remote ID, they'll say, yeah, it probably doesn't need it, it's probably only a toy. And that'll be an end to the matter. So it'll be much easier You'll be less likely to be bothered by the public, by Karens, by the police, by the FAA, if we've been flying enough sub 250 craft that people realise that it probably doesn't need remote ID. That's the strategy that I would use. Now, some other words of what I hope are wisdom. We run a risk at the moment. We've got a community which is becoming a little divided. Now, there are people like myself who would not want to comply. Now, remote ID is going to come to New Zealand. When it does, I will not be complying. Now, notice the Civil Aviation Authority has started following me on Twitter. That's a sinister sign. But I will not be complying with remote ID because I see no merit to it. And certainly not as implemented in the USA. So some people will not comply. Other people will choose to comply because, whatever reason, they may believe all rules must be followed. Or they may be in a situation where they can't afford to take the risk of getting a fine or perhaps losing a pilot's license. They may be have a pilot's license. And the problem is that if they fly a drone and get done for having no remote ID, the FAA can take their pilot's license away. It's nothing to do with their full-size aviation, but the FAA can still take the pilot's license. So a lot of people will have some very good incentives to comply, whether they agree with remote ID or not. And as a community, each side of this divide must respect the decisions and choices made by the other. As somebody who will not comply, I respect the fact that some will comply. I'm not going to criticize them for that. It's unreasonable to criticize them because I don't know all the circumstances. And I'm a great believer in free speech. I'm a great believer in freedom of choice. And when you start criticizing people because the choice they've made is not your choice, you're basically criticizing freedom of choice. I support it. I may not agree with you, but I will fight to the death for your right to hold your opinion. That's the way I look at the world. And while we still have a world where freedom of choice is something we're allowed to do, let's exercise that freedom, because the way things are going, we may not have it much longer. So use it while you can. So if you're a compliant person, don't criticize people who choose not to comply. The only people they are potentially hurting are themselves. Remember, remote ID is not a safety thing. No one is going to get hurt just because a drone or a model doesn't have remote ID on it. The only thing that will happen is that the operator of that may face a fine. So they're taking the risk. It's entirely their risk. It's not going to influence you in any way. So don't criticize them because they choose a different path to you, just as they should not criticize you for taking the path you've chosen. We must remain together as a community. Do not let this issue divide us, because one of the easy ways to conquer something is divide. Divide and conquer. Do not let us be divided, because then we will not have the necessary cohesion and strength to push back against the further overregulation that is coming very soon. And we must be there willing to all push together. That won't happen if we're all fighting amongst ourselves. Everybody has a choice. Respect the choice that others make. Now, my next piece of advice, particularly to those who choose to comply, is do not buy a whole lot of remote ID modules. Do not buy any more than you absolutely need. And you may wonder, why not? Well, I'll tell you. Because I'm predicting, now I may be wrong, I'm always willing to admit that I make mistakes and I don't always get it right, but I have a fairly high degree of confidence in this prediction, that the broadcast remote ID module you buy today will not be of any use to you in a year or two's time. It will have its approval rescinded. It will no longer be compliant because the FAA is going to change the standard for remote ID for two good reasons. The first one is that the current standard broadcasts the operator's position or the takeoff point openly to anyone who wants to pick it up, be they muggers, bad actors, whatever. That it increases the risk to the operator. Now, the FAA has acknowledged this. Kevin Morris in a live stream has said, we acknowledge this, but our advice to people who may be confronted while flying a drone is to call 911. It's no good to you if you're lying in a pool of blood and the thief is made off with your phone. So having acknowledged the increased risk, the FAA is in the very difficult position that when, and I don't say if, I say when somebody is assaulted and injured and robbed, or worse, huge pressure will come to bear on them to change that element of remote ID, to make the pilot location or the takeoff point encrypted so that only authorized people can see it. Not the Karens, not the muggers, not the general public. Only law enforcement and federal agencies will have access to that location. It'll be encrypted for everybody else. That will mean that the current standard will no longer apply. So all those broadcast remote ID modules you've bought that comply with the current standard will have their approval rescinded. They will no longer be compliant with the new standard. Now, if you've got a half a dozen or a dozen of these modules, that leaves you in the invidious position that you either throw them in the trash or you send them back to the manufacturer to be reflashed. And if you've bought European modules, then you've got the cost of shipping it to Europe and having it shipped back. That's if the companies, or any of the companies, are still in business. Remember, there'll be a huge boom in remote ID modules as people who choose to be compliant rush out and buy them. But once they have bought enough, there won't be many of these to be sold anymore. You know, because commercial operators, they'll have standard remote ID built into their new drones. Under Part 107, you have to have standard remote ID, unless it's a legacy drone. So after the first 6 months, there's not going to be a lot of sales of remote ID modules. So many of the companies that have been set up to make these things will disappear. So when the standard changes, who is going to be there to reflash them? And remember, they're supposed to be tamper-proof, so they don't have it's not like your flight controller where you can just plug it into your computer and reflash it. No. These remote ID modules have to be tamper-proof, so they're not easy to reflash in the way that most of our other stuff is. So you'll probably have to throw each of those $100 broadcast or more broadcast remote ID modules in the trash and buy new ones. So you don't want to be left holding a lot of those, do you? And if that's not enough, there's another reason why they'll need to reflash these modules, or you'll need to buy new ones. That is the spoofing issue. Now, we've seen, it's been proven, there's videos on YouTube showing just how easy it is to spoof remote ID. And it can be done from miles away from where you want your ghost drone to appear. So it's a very safe way to disrupt traffic at an airport, or to send a military installation into lockdown. Very, very easy indeed. And this will happen. Again, it's not if, it's when. And when this happens, the government and a whole lot of three-letter agencies are going to come down on the FAA and say, you must introduce anti-spoofing measures to the remote ID protocol. The remote ID standard must be unspoofable. And that means they're going to have to put digital signing in there, which means, again, any broadcast remote ID modules you have will suddenly become non-compliant. Their approval will be rescinded. You'll have no option but to throw them in the trash and buy new ones, or send them back to be reflashed if the company that you bought them from even exists. So again, if you're sitting there with a dozen of these modules, it could be thousands of dollars that you have to throw away because the FAA did not do its job properly in the first place and include these measures right from the get-go. So it could happen this could happen all at once. We could have both these changes implemented in one hit, or it may happen progressively. Perhaps spoofing will be the issue initially, so they'll put the digital signing in, and then someone will get mugged or whatever, or worse, and they'll have to put in the encryption for the pilot location. Hopefully that happens all at once and we get it done out of the way, but otherwise there may be two tranches where you have to throw away what you've got and buy new stuff because the FAA stuffed up the first time round. So do not think that the remote ID modules you're buying today will still be of any use to you in a year or two's time. Probably not. So that's it. I'm going to do another video because the issue in respect to people who review products or post videos of their flying on YouTube for monetization, that's a big one. And the 107 operators especially are inconvenienced by this. And I'm going to pressure the FAA to change the situation, because at the moment their perspective is that if you're monetizing your videos, you must fly under 107. And I'm going to say that's bullshit. And I have a reason. I'll show you exactly why that's bullshit. I've asked the FAA already about this. They have ignored my question. They're just crickets. I posted a question on Twitter, which I tagged the FAA Drone Zone. I've got several replies from other people, FAA Drone Zone, just ignoring me because they don't want to answer this question, because they realize they've stuffed up, that there's a huge hypocrisy here. That means that people who are reviewing products on YouTube, or if you're just posting videos to a monetized YouTube channel, you should not need a Part 107. And I'm going to prove why. Anyway, so stay tuned for that video, especially if you're Joshua Bardwell and you perhaps see your business being severely impacted by the effects of remote ID. That's about it. I'm also going to do a bit of a video on how the FAA are performing very poorly at interacting and engaging with the community. Very, very poorly. They are a right-only tool at this stage. They talk, they don't listen. They're not listening, they're not engaging, and that is bad for everybody. I'm going to call them on that. And I want to have a one-on-one live stream with Kevin Morris or somebody from the FAA. To date, that hasn't happened. Nobody is particularly keen on that. I don't know why I'm keen, but nobody else is. So I may have to call on you guys to put some pressure on the FAA so we can get a live stream going where I will put your questions and my questions, and I will not take dodgy answers. I will want them to actually give us real answers, not just avoid the questions, beat around the bush. I want hard questions with hard answers. So stay tuned for that. Lots of things coming up, and hopefully some more flying, but it is spring. It's raining. It rained last weekend. It's raining this weekend. Windy as hell, so flight videos have to wait for a while. Anyway, for a lot of people, this is more important. But thank you for watching. Thanks to my Patreon supporters. Thanks to the people who are members of this channel. Remember, becoming a member of this channel gives you nothing except warm fuzzy feelings. And those who use the thanks button occasionally on a video, just to flick me a few dollars, brilliant. And YouTube, you suck because you pay next to nothing for the ads you run on my videos. Never mind. Okay, I've got more videos to make. Bye for now.
Overregulation is like a tumor. It's killing our hobby. It must be terminated. Now!